Okay, we are live.
We are.
And welcome to Mentionables Live. Here tonight, we welcome you to this special edition of Mentionables Apologetic Theater 2999. So welcome to the show tonight. With me, I'm Caleb. Over here to my other direction is the one and only
Joel Furchess.
Down here right below me,
Clinton Wilcox.
There we go. And then over here diagonally, this is always so fun trying to figure out where I'm pointing.
This is Maverick Christian. Hey, everybody.
Glad to have you all with us tonight. Tonight we have a very special show. We hinted at this one back, I don't know, in one of our other episodes a good ways back. But tonight we're going to be taking a look at the film The Witch.
Now, is that the Witch or the VVitch or the VVitch or the 5-5-itch or the 55-itch?
I'm pretty sure it's the VVitch.
Okay, that's what I'm going with.
All of the above.
All of the above.
So, yeah, so if listeners don't know, you should just stop this video, go watch the movie now, then come back and watch this later.
Yes, nobody who hasn't seen the movie should be here right now.
Except for me. Sorry. Yeah.
Well, this should be interesting. We'll have an outsider's perspective as
All
we
right.
describe this movie. So that's going to be interesting. But for you and all the listeners, you know, there is a absolutely massive spoiler warning.
Right. So
for this whole thing.
full disclosure, I'm the only one here who hasn't actually seen the film.
Right. It's actually a surprisingly well done film, and it's not the kind of film that I would have chosen to see without being compelled to by Caleb.
Right.
Thanks
Are you
a
saying
lot,
you had-
Caleb.
Are you saying you had no free
Yeah.
will in the matter?
Whoa. Who's saying I don't got no free will?
I'm just saying.
You haven't seen the movie, you're saying I got no free will? Get out of here.
Have you got an Italian mobster on us?
It sounds that way.
See,
Forget about it.
When I was in theater, Italian mobster was essentially the only role they ever assigned me. So
Oh, all right.
somehow I slip into that every once in a while without even thinking about it.
Yeah, I have actually done a little bit of acting myself. I played a king in a play. It wasn't like King Henry or anything, majestic like that, but it was a local production. And actually, I had auditioned to play for the play A Christmas Carol, but unfortunately, they said that I was actually perfect for the part of Tiny Tim, but I was too tall. So,
I could
I
see
did a bit of
that.
acting in college.
what's that?
I did a bit of acting in college. I had to
cool.
audition for a play there, but I made it in.
Oh, right on.
Well, I did acting
feel out of place
professionally.
doing that.
I worked production group called the American Immersion Theater Group, and we traveled and stuff like that.
Oh,
I won't go into the whole thing, but it was cool to live out a childhood dream of being a professional actor and getting paid for it.
Indeed.
Speaking of acting,
Are we supposed to do a movie tonight?
yeah, you didn't know? That's okay. So let's dive into this before we kind of get into thoughts and discussing kind of our take on the movie and that sort of thing. And we always try to just discuss something with apologetics relevance in some way. So, there's either theological issues or deconversion, or
Say what?
Yeah, that horrible movie you put me through last time. So,
Paul?
yeah, that was.
Yeah, I didn't watch that one either because I didn't actually participate in that discussion. I was out of town that week.
Well, you missed out on a whole lot of nothing.
Yeah, no, because I remember you told me about it, and I remember being disappointed by your recounting of it because considering who was in it and who wrote it, I would have expected it to be a good comedy, even if it was a bit sacrilegious.
It had its moments.
Oh, the alien one, that one.
Yeah.
Okay, I was like, Paul the Apostle? That movie? Like, okay.
I
was thinking of some like Christian apostle movie, but
yeah.
I don't know what you're thinking of.
Naive Maverick Christian.
that was one with Simon Pegg, right?
Yeah, I just wasn't expecting you folks to be discussing a movie like that here, considering, yes, the pro-atheism vibe it had.
Yeah,
that's actually the whole reason we were discussing it. See, occasionally we apologists discuss atheists.
Really?
Weird, right?
Yeah. I thought I liked the movie. I know not the pro-atheism side so much, but movie qua movie, I thought it was pretty good.
Well, that makes one of us, I think. I don't even think Joel enjoyed it, but he wanted to make me watch it anyway. So, but that's
the first time I watched it, not the second time I watched it.
Yeah. But that's not the movie we're discussing tonight. Tonight, we're discussing something rather different. And, people have heard me talk on a number of podcasts about my affection for horror. So, I had to know this kind of episode was coming at some point. But this movie in particular is a period horror film. In terms of we're dealing with Puritan times in New England, and that's kind of the setting for this. Think Salem witch trials times, because it certainly gets into some of that.
Yeah, if I could speak to that for a second.
Yeah, go ahead.
Him like before this tribunal of Puritans, and there's clearly some kind of condemnation going on. Not that Puritans ever condemned anybody, but Scarlet Letter. No, I mean, this thing's going on, and my immediate thought was, one of these. So it's going to be a witch trial type thing. And honestly, I think it intentionally set that expectation because it completely defied that expectation. In witch trial, and like it comes up to hitting all the beats of a witch trial thing and then completely subverts your expectations at every turn, which I thought was extremely well done. I think they set you up to expect one kind of movie and delivered a different kind of movie, which was a masterful stroke, I thought.
So is there a cinematic reason that they style it The Witch with two V's instead of a W, or is that just a stylistic thing for the title?
Well, there were 55 of them instead of one of them, so.
No, I suspect it looks more archaic because this movie is set early 17th century, I think 1630 or so. And when you watch the movie, they kind of use sort of obsolete English in the movie.
That was a question I had during the movie. I was wondering, now, are they speaking like old-fashioned English because
it's a period piece, yeah?
Or are they speaking that way because they use the King James Bible, and that's just kind of how King James Bible people talk when they're being all religiously?
Yeah, I mean, if it's set in that period, then I would imagine it's just because of the period that it's set in. I mean, the reason the King James Bible uses that English is because that's the English of the time.
Right, but the Amish still speak like that. They spoke exactly like Amish do now.
Do they still speak?
Have you read Shakespeare?
Shake who?
Shakespeare. I mean, this was roughly the time Shakespeare was around, 1630.
Oh, really? I thought he was around earlier than that.
Yeah, and I mean, the King James Bible and Shakespeare's works are a lot of what shaped the language at the time. I mean, these are two of the most major works that are going on at that time. So it had an influence on language.
Yeah, Shakespeare died early 17th century, which is roughly the time the movie takes place.
Right. Well, I mean, this is during sort of a colonial type period. And apparently, the biggest problem about taming the untamed wilderness in the colonies was all the VVitches out there. I mean, you couldn't throw a stone without hitting a VVitch of the VVuds.
Oh, this is the kind of show I'm having to lead tonight. Okay. So before we dive in, I'm actually going to go ahead and show that clip at the very beginning of the movie. But before we dive in, would one of you like to give us kind of before we get into spoiler territory, we'll throw all that up, but what's the kind of 30-second version of the plot of this movie?
So, family having a religious disagreement with their community is exiled, and they go to try to live by themselves in the woods. But otherworldly bad things start happening. It may just be, too, a VVitch in the woods. I'll stop now. It's the last time I'm making that joke.
Hey, this isn't a prequel to M. Night Shyamalan's The Village, is it?
Thank heavens no. That movie was awful.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think in my view that was probably his first really bad movie. Even though you can kind of see a kind of a downward progression before that, but I think that was his first truly bad film. So I think Signs still had a lot of good things going for it.
Oh yeah, Signs was a good movie.
Signs was
altogether
excellent. And, to be honest, I think The Village was a little underrated. It wasn't as horrible as people thought it was, I don't think.
I disagree, but
had
that's for another video.
Undercurrents of a good movie.
Yeah, sorry, I kind of started a tangent here.
Now, that's not
with a lame joke.
That's not to say that it didn't traumatize me enough that I was worried this movie was going to kind of have the same twist at the end. So I definitely still have some trauma from The Village and that ridiculous ending. Mm-hmm. But I like the movie. But anyway,
good features.
Good with Maverick. I think that was a good summary of this. This one's certainly a much better period piece than The Village would ever be considered, since,
right.
Yeah. Anyway, let's dive in. I'm going to go ahead and show this clip from the beginning of the movie where the family's being excommunicated. I think it really kind of gives a feel for the movie and kind of lets viewers see what you're being thrown into. And it was one of those things I didn't pay much attention to the first time I saw it. Mm-hmm. So, hopefully listeners will have seen the movie and we'll see this second time around. So let me see if we can share this with them.
So it does a pretty good job of setting the tone for the rest of the film then?
I think so. How about you be the judge of that after we watch this short clip? Mm-hmm.
What went we out into this wilderness to find? Leaving our country, kindred, our fathers' houses. We travailed that vast ocean. For what? For what?
We must ask thee to be silent.
Was it not the pure and faithful dispensation of the gospel and the kingdom of God?
No more. We are your judges, and not you ours.
I cannot be judged by false Christians, for I have done nothing save preach Christ's true gospel.
Must you continue to dishonor the Lord of the Commonwealth and the Church with your prideful conceit?
If my conscience sees it fit.
Then shall you be banished from this plantation's liberties.
I would be glad on it.
Then take your leave and trouble us no further.
How sadly hath the Lord testified against you. Catherine.
Thomason.
Thomas would do what she want.
All right. So there's your introduction to the movie.
I'll tell you what, as soon as I heard that guy's voice, I was sold.
Yeah, it certainly got my attention.
There's lots more where that came from.
Yeah. Now, speaking of M. Night Shyamalan, did I see the girl from Split in that opening scene?
Yeah, it was.
I didn't pick up on that. Yeah, I probably should have IMDb'd the actress.
Okay, Anya something, I think is her name.
Is it Anna Taylor-Joy?
Or yeah, I think that might be it. That sounds familiar.
Yeah, she's in the upcoming New Mutants movie.
Yeah, right. I've heard of that too. I saw a couple reviews of New Mutants, but probably shouldn't say anything in case others haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, I forgot. She's like older now. That movie was 5 years ago.
Oh, was it?
How quickly these kids grow up, huh?
Right.
She grows up pretty well in that movie, too.
You ain't kidding. So that kind of gives a feel for the movie. This is definitely not what you see out of a lot of horror movies these days. You don't see a lot of period piece horror movies. At least it's the only really good one I can think of.
Yeah, I mean, that opening scene I thought was really good. I mean, it got my attention. It really made me, curious what this guy had done to warrant this tribunal against him and why he was condemning the ones who were judging him. So,
if you see the movie, nothing will be revealed.
Yeah, I know.
Really?
You never find out.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
Okay.
Although, in retrospect, you might question whether or not he was in the wrong due to all the things that happened to him subsequently. Both of them are throwing sort of religious-ese accusations against each other, like, God condemns you. No, God condemns you. Well, maybe he was the one actually being condemned there. You tend to take his side because he's the main character, but...
Right.
Yeah, his deep, gravelly voice instantly convinces me.
Right.
I don't even stop to think.
All right.
It's interesting that I think there's so many parallels that kind of play out through this movie. In the same way he's kind of cursing them in the beginning, you kind of see this fall back on him. And I think the movie pretty well explains exactly what he's being condemned for. Because it comes up again and again in the movie that, this is a character with a lot of pride, to the extent that, it really leads his family down some dark roads. And, when you look at the initial cause of all this, it seems to be this pride, which continues to get him in trouble throughout the movie. So if I had to guess, I would say that his pride and the way he deals with people are probably what got him removed.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because it's the movie's clearly drawing on aspects of the Salem witch incident. I'm not talking about like the whole village turns against these girls or whatnot, but if you've ever read about that, you may recall that it was some little girls that were going out and playing at the woods, and they were sort of playing these games and then claimed to be infested by the devil and so forth. And you see a lot of callbacks to those kinds of stories without, doing the direct thing in those stories. Yeah,
very true. We actually were studying witch trials for school this week, so it worked out very convenient. I didn't let the kids sit down and watch this movie. But, in looking at the Salem witch trials, it's been a few years since I've looked at it from a kind of historical perspective. And, it really was very interesting. And I found out now that they think that maybe even a fungus that grew on wheat in the area at the time may have been the cause of some of these really weird symptoms that people were having within the area and that sort of thing. So it's interesting the lens we've gotten as we've learned more about science that kind of shed some light on some of what was going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, every time there's like some historical freak out, they blame that particular fungus. Like, have you ever heard of the dancing plague?
Yeah.
They blame
Yeah,
that
I heard of
fungus
that.
for
The mushroom kingdom's going to get pretty upset if they keep doing that. We might have a full-on sewer war at some point, and I have to call on the Mario Brothers.
Well, I was going to say, I learned from the Super Mario Brothers movie that you're supposed to trust the fungus.
Yep, exactly. That's why they wouldn't like us bad-mouthing it the way we are.
Right.
Okay, so that gives a feel for the movie. Now we're gonna start diving into spoiler territory here, because I don't really think you can take this discussion any further without getting into significant spoilers for this movie, because it really is an experience as you go through. This is not, if slasher flicks are your thing, this is not going to be the movie you're going to want to go see. But if you like a slow burn,
gory. Wasn't a whole lot of blood at all.
No, it was, in that element, I think it was very Lovecraftian in that you don't ever see what exactly is going on. Your imagination leads to, most of the conclusions about what's happening.
Well, sometimes you do see it, but it's used sparingly. And I think that's good for among other reasons that it has a lot more impact that way. You're not like desensitized to having brought up over and over and over again. It's a lot of stats, a lot of atmosphere.
I'm blaming you for this, Caleb, but you brought it up. So honestly, I was reminded of Lovecraft a lot throughout this film. And I was, specifically, he had kind of this obsession, if you will, with the sort of witch legends from the Salem, in his books, he had these witch cults and things that were going on, but for some reason he tied them into his cosmic horror, which is a really weird combination. But I was recalling the festival, I think is the name of the story that he did, where this guy kind of is following his ancestors and gets caught up in one of these witchcraft traditions. And then there is the Dreams in the Witch House. Struck me because throughout this movie, this book keeps coming back, and it gets plopped in front of one of the characters or the other, and hey, sign your name in the book. And it doesn't take a whole lot of knowledge of occult and so forth to figure out what's going on there. But in Dreams of the Witch House, you had a similar thing where this guy kept having these dreams, and he was brought into the presence by the black man or the dark man, however you'd like to say, man. It was a guy you can't see, because anyways, so to sign their name in this book, which was committing them to something. And then, another thing that Lovecraft did was one of his entities was the black goats of the wood with 1,000 young. And you see kind of that element in here as well, which is also, again, kind of tied back to cult and witchcraft. So, yeah. Now I'm going to shut up about it.
Yeah, the child sacrifice also played heavily in Dreams of the Witch House, and I think
that's true.
We see that pretty early on here as well, and it's one of the things that I think is far less ambiguous in the movie.
Yeah, that's like the first horror moment of the movie. So, we're in spoiler territory, so this is kind of the instigating event that kicks off is that there's a baby in the family, and so the big sister is out there playing peekaboo with the baby, and she peeks and then she aboos, and then the baby isn't there anymore. It's one of these traditional horror movie kind of things where you look away, you turn back, and they're gone, kind of thing. And the family thinks it was a vavoof that took it into the woods, and so they go tracking that down.
I think that joke's gotten old by now.
He's going to keep you. If you haven't been on enough shows yet with him, he's going to use it until we sign off.
Oh,
Yeah, I know. It's going to be really, really old by the time we're done with it.
It comes around again. It gets old, then it gets funny again if I keep doing it.
Mm-hmm. So to backtrack just a second, I find there's some really interesting elements in this movie, even before you get to the baby disappearing. The family starts singing this hymn as they're leaving. And actually the hymn seems to be, I'm not sure of exactly what the name of the hymn was, but it's very heavily based on Psalm 111. So if you look up Psalm 111, it's very interesting in kind of the reverse parallels. This movie is very much the opposite of that in many ways. And Robert Eggers, the director, I really enjoy the films he's made because he goes to such depth in that every single detail really has meaning and significance. He loves period pieces for some reason. Another movie he's done is called The Lighthouse, with Robert Pattinson and Green Goblin. Why is it blanking for me here?
Willem Dafoe?
Yes. And it's set in, again, same kind of time frame, but it's this New England lighthouse keepers story, but it's based on both Roman mythology and this actual legend. So, again, he goes into such depth with everything that happens that it all has meaning in some way and ties back into mythology or, pulls in scripture in places. Makes for a really detailed movie to explore, So, that brings us back kind of up to the baby disappears.
Uh-huh.
And we really start to learn more about the family. I mean, this baby's gone before we really get to know much about them. But to introduce everybody to the family, we have Williams, who's the father, Catherine, who's the mother. Thomason's the oldest. She's the girl you saw in that clip. Caleb's her younger brother. And then Jonas and Mercy are what appear to be twins. And then Samuel was the baby that's now already gone from the story at this point. So a lot of biblical themed names there as well, which and it's Puritan culture. So
Come on.
kind of expect it. I find it interesting too. There's pretty significant time gap as well because they had to set up their home and all this. I'm assuming this was not a 1-day process.
It was a prefab. They brought it with them.
Oh, okay, that makes a lot more sense.
Those prefab wood cabins you hear so much about?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're pretty common back in the early 17th century.
So after their son disappears, and you get glimpses of other stuff going on, but the whole movie takes you on this journey where you're not really sure whether there's real evil taking place or this is all within their heads. It's very what's the word I'm looking for? It's very ambiguous.
Ambiguous, yeah.
Yeah, in terms of what's actually going on.
Yeah, no, it's the movie develops over time and it turns into one of those stories where everybody thinks everybody else is the bad guy, or like it's like The Thing where, one of them is clearly the alien and so everybody's accusing everybody else of being the bad one that's causing all these tragedies to happen to the family and dabbling in witchcraft and so forth. Expects everybody else to be bad and they think that there's something. It's like one of those hunts where you suspect that that some the kind of a VVitch hunt.
Yeah, one of those. I'm gonna take this a slightly different direction, back to the father a little bit, and this kind of pride we see with him. With this, I think there's a lot of interesting theological elements that you can draw from this movie. You have these people's crops failing is another one of the big things. As bad stuff starts to happen to the family, one of the big things is their crops are failing. That's pretty bad if you're living off your crops. But, I think there's some significance to the fact that, this Father William has rotten fruit. From a Christian perspective, you're looking at kind of a lot of the biblical language that comes into this as well. And I think you see that with him, there's this element of this sin that he won't let go of, that continues to drive his family deeper and deeper into this evil. This is a bit of a stretch, but I will say one of my other kind of pet theories about this movie is that each of the family member represents one of the 7 deadly sins. It's a bit of a stretch when you get to the baby, because gluttony's the only one left at that point, which all you see is the baby eating at the time.
Babies are always gluttonous. Believe
Exactly.
that. Just eat.
True.
So, I think you could easily see the father as prideful. I think you see envy from the mother in this one. Thomason clearly has some greed issues towards the end of the movie, at least.
What about the silver cup? Wouldn't that be greed?
Could be representative of it.
But she didn't have anything to do with that. That was the dad and the mom's thing. The
Yeah.
mom wanted to keep the cup. The dad gave it away.
Yeah, so you could maybe switch greed and envy there between those two, and that might even work out even
The
better.
mother could represent wrath. She was pretty wrathful near the end after she tried to murder somebody.
That's true. I was leaning towards Mercy being the wrathful one, because she's the one who cooks up these lies about her sister and, causes all this trouble for her sister for no reason. Jonas, it does nothing of value the whole movie, so he's clearly sloth.
Well, I mean, could it just be that instead of trying to pinpoint each deadly sin with each person, maybe they all, in some ways, encompass all of the, or at least multiple of the deadly sins?
And I think that would be fair too. And I think you could look at this movie either way. You could see this as a family who's just kind of fallen into trouble for something that's, maybe just the dad's fault. Or you can see
Caleb would be lost, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
There was clearly a bit of that going on.
Yeah.
I thought they were going to take it a much worse direction than it ended up going. So, on that one.
Right.
But I didn't catch it until the sister said it. But the baby had not yet been baptized when it disappeared, so it was an unbaptized babe. And then you see it kind of in the woods, and there's this thing going on that is kind of gory. Well, it hints at being gory. They don't show much. And then the witch character, like, she alternates between being young and elderly. And, you can guess what the blood of an unbaptized, a woman that wanted to stay youthful. But, there were hints that there was some shape-shifting going on, because, like, this rabbit kept showing up and had this sort of ominous presence.
And so, in a lot of witch lore, you always have a familiar. The witch uses some form of animal. So I think this rabbit,
cute little bunny rabbit.
Yeah, that bunny looked evil, man. He just scared at people.
It could be a killer rabbit. Like
Speaking of familiars, they're usually like cats or crows or like a rat with a human face.
Well, King Arthur and his group had to fight off a killer rabbit.
I recall that, but it wasn't cute.
Oh, right. Well, it started cute.
You ever seen one of these things the jackalopes are based on? Apparently, there are these rabbits with this actual disease that cause horns to just shoot out of their faces. Good gosh, it's disturbing.
Oh, that's the one where like the bones don't ever stop growing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. But these things are nasty looking. I would not want to run into one of them. So, speaking of killer animals, we'll kind of fast forward with our spoiler territory before we get into some wider themes. But things keep getting worse and worse for this family. And you guys feel free to jump in at any point you want to as well. And they begin to recognize that things aren't exactly going too well for them. Between the crops failing, they've lost one kid. They begin to try and hunt, and father sells a silver cup to get a hunting rifle, which backfires, and he's apparently not used to using one, so it's not doing a whole lot of good in hunting down either the wolf or any food for them to eat as well.
We should point out the rifle literally backfired.
Yeah, I was going to ask. Did he mean the rifle actually itself backfired? Or yes,
it actually backfired.
Well, I mean, this is a flint rifle, so what happened is he put his face up to next to where the hammer strikes the flint, and the powder kind of exploded into his face when the hammer. Because I clearly didn't know what he's doing. I live in the 21st century, and I know how to pack a powder rifle.
So, so things just keep getting worse for them. And another interesting foreshadowing comes up about this time is there are two things the father has to do in this. One, he's constantly chopping wood through this whole movie. Every time something goes wrong, he goes out and chops wood. It's the one thing it feels like he has control over, so he's always chopping wood. And then it's interesting, you have this incident midway through the movie where he has to wrestle this goat who is known as Black Phillip back into its cage. And so you see this struggle with this animal that begins to have a more prominent role in the movie.
Yeah. Whoa.
Yeah, I mean,
Ram a lamb. Whoa, Black Phillip. Ram. Sorry, that just popped in my head.
So the two twins in the movie, they have a relationship with this goat. They're always chasing it around, and it's chasing them around, and it's great fun for them. And they chant this thing at the goat. I didn't catch the words of the chant, but I'm sure you know them, Caleb.
I didn't write that down. It goes something along the lines of Black Phillip has a crown. He's the king of the earth and the land, and very much praise for this goat in a very bizarre way.
Yeah. It's good stuff.
Yeah, it is. And actually, a lot of the language in their song, in looking at Psalm 111 with this, a lot of the language, again, it was similar. It was not the hymn we heard at the beginning, but a lot of this language about him being king parallels a lot of Psalm 111. So at this point, as they really recognize that things are wrong, the son goes out into the woods. I forget the circumstances as to why him and his sister Thomason went out.
Yeah, I have no idea why they went out. He just kind of decided to do it one time. I don't know if he was trying, because always chiding him about not helping out and not being sufficient. So he kind of felt insufficient. So I wouldn't be surprised if he went out to try to hunt and bring something back to his dad. Oh yeah, he went out to check the trap.
That's right, the rabbit trap.
Yeah. So, chances are he was going out and trying to bring a rabbit back and make his dad proud of him.
And so, of course, that goes wrong, too. Caleb gets lost in the wood. Thomason gets knocked out. And so they bring her back home, but no Caleb. He's missing. And so,
and she begged to go with him, too. He didn't want to take her, but she, forced him almost.
Yep. And so the family's freaking out because they've lost their second kid at this point. The mom just falls deeper and deeper into this kind of depression and grief over what's happened.
Yeah, just to speak about that for a moment, when Caleb's out hunting with his dad, they start talking about the baby and how the mother is so distraught. And of course, a mother would be if she lost her baby, but then it came out that the baby had not yet been baptized. And so the son, Caleb starts having this conversation with his dad about, hey, is my brother burning in hell now? Did he go to hell? And the dad doesn't want to have that conversation with him. And so that sort of becomes violent. And then he starts asking, am I going to burn in hell if I die? Which I suppose might indicate that Caleb had not yet been baptized either.
Oh, that's a good point. I didn't think about that, but you're right. That might be the case.
So might it be the case then that the religious dispute, you just lost...
No, he's
okay. Yeah, so could it be then that perhaps the religious dispute they were having at the beginning was whether or not his kids... Sorry, I was standing there for a moment.
I know. I saw the second screen pop up. I had to add that second screen while I could.
So could it be then that the religious dispute they were having then might have been over child baptism? Because if the father was preaching Christ's pure gospel, perhaps he was preaching that you have to believe and make the public confession and repent of your sins to be saved. It's not baptism that saves you.
Oh, maybe believer's baptism, perhaps.
Yeah, maybe that was the religious dispute they were having.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I only say that because based on what I've heard and based on conversations I've had in the past, that seems like that seems to mirror a lot of the some of the discussions I've had over things like believer's baptism with Catholics and Calvinists, and because I'm not a Calvinist either, but so that sounds like that could have.
If the if all the children in the family were unbaptized, that might explain a lot of what happened in the film too.
That's true. That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. See, having somebody who hasn't watched the movie does have some value here.
Oh, happy to contribute as much as I can.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. And so, as Joel said, there's this issue over baptism, and Caleb gets lost in the wood. Luckily, he comes wandering back. And everybody who comes wandering into this movie at some point is naked for some reason.
I know why he was naked.
Yeah. He encountered a very beautiful witch in the woods. Again, it implies something happened, but you don't exactly know what.
Well, they did a good job at setting the stage that Caleb is now maturing and, starting to go into those adolescent type territory and his sort of thoughts and instincts. So, yeah.
And, come to think of it now, there's some other interesting implications there as well, because he comes back and he's very ill in some way. And eventually they pull this apple out of his throat, like a crab apple. Mm-hmm. So, you do have some symbolism over original sin there. In this fruit they're pulling out of his throat over this issue. It wanders back. You recognize that he's naked when he wanders back. So, there's certainly some symbolism there too, I believe.
So, the apple would, has a number of, because he said that he had found a crabapple tree in the valley that he was taking his dad to, but he was just covering for his dad going into the wilderness without the wife's knowledge so that he could sell the silver cup. So he was just trying to cover for his dad. There was no apple tree out there. So that happened. And then, of course, there's also the symbol Snow White thing where you have this old lady that's actually a young, beautiful lady, and she comes out and offers the poison apple. So, the idea of tying an apple to a witch, exists in fairy tales and legends. And
I figured it was an allusion to the apple as in the forbidden fruit,
yeah,
like the Garden of Eden. That's what I immediately thought of, even though if you go back and read Genesis, it doesn't say it's an apple, but for some reason it's part of the
Yeah.
mythology anyway.
I wouldn't be surprised, though, if the movie was tying it at least 3 ways that way. The apple is a very symbolic fruit. And so, they also had set the stage for the apple by, him inventing this crabapple tree that didn't exist.
Yeah, and also considering that the apple is such a big part of people's views of the Garden of Eden, since the Bible isn't specific about what fruit it was, it seems like even if they aren't trying to insinuate that the fruit was an apple, using an apple might help with the symbolism that they are trying to to get people to recognize, if that was their intention.
Yeah.
And I think you're probably right, Joel. I think it does probably tie multiple ways. I kind of leaned the same way with, it being a Garden of Eden kind of reference here. But you're right, it does have some ties. And, this is called a New England fairy tale. I mean, it very much is a kind of Grimm's fairy tale story. If you just look at it from, a surface level perspective, I mean, that's very much what it is.
That and the Snow White story probably has the apple being offered because the apple is so iconic as the forbidden fruit. So I wouldn't doubt that, the apple is its ties back to this sort of temptation motif.
Is this movie actually based on a fairy tale, or is it just kind of a conglomeration of different mythologies and
conglomeration? At the end of the movie, it puts up this thing saying, hey, we drew from everywhere, from legends and from fairy tales and from actual witchcraft events, things like that.
Okay.
More specifically, it says this film was inspired by many folk tales, fairy tales, and written records of historical witchcraft, including journals, diaries, and court records. Much of the dialogue comes directly from these period sources.
Okay.
So, so it's got a lot of symbology throughout this in one way or another, and it's here where we kind of begin to get into things really start to get strange. Caleb seems to be possessed in some way, shape, or form. He begins having these seizures and very much kind of typical kind of possession type experience.
And that's another way that it reminded me of Lovecraft is that, towards the end there, he starts nailing his family. The dad starts nailing his family back so they can't get out. And that was sort of the Lovecraftian solution to whenever anybody got possessed or went insane, is just, board them up in the attic and forget about them. That way you're not killing them, but you don't have to deal with them.
They're not going to summon any evil. Don't worry about them.
Yeah, and just go ahead and put them in there with the black goat.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing can possibly go wrong boarding them up with the evil goat.
Right.
So Caleb has this exorcism. I think this was right before he boards up the rest of the kids. There's this exorcism of some kind. And then Caleb dies, doesn't survive this exorcism attempt. And then accusations really start to fly. The twins accuse Thomason of being a witch and all these occurrences being her fault. So she says, no, it was them who was talking to the goat. And so, that then the dad decides, let's board them all up. So he takes the kids, all of the rest of them, and the goat, puts them all in the shed together. Great idea.
It should
and
be
this
mentioned.
is after Thomason mentions the twins babble to the goat.
Mm-hmm.
And there's already indications like, oh, the goat's evil. Well, I'm just like you, the twins, with the evil goat, and kind of see what happens. This is a good strategy to fight.
Oh yeah, and there's kind of that evil twin symbology that you get from, movies and mythology and so forth. But it should be mentioned that Thomason did a really convincing job of, teasing her siblings about her being a witch. And she did it's so convincing that you, the movie watcher, are like, there might be something going on there. She seems really sincere.
Like doing it in jest. I just like, wow, she's really stupid. Of course, she didn't know she was in a horror movie, but even so, really dumb.
No, I mean, the actress managed to ride the line between, hey, I'm just messing with her, to, yeah, I'm really evil. Especially since it came out of nowhere. Like, you don't know why.
Well, I think we're the twins talking about the Witch of the Wood. They're kind of bothering Thomason, so Thomason just kind of jabbing right back.
All right.
But still, it's like, well, boy, that escalated quickly. I mean, that really got out of hand.
And then she described the actual witchcraft which took place with the kid that got taken. So like she managed to nail it on the head. Sure. Exactly why the kid was taken and what happened to the kid.
Yeah. What surprises me is that it takes until kind of this part in the movie before the family begins to kind of get to that point of recognizing there's really something evil at play here. And I thought it was kind of realistic in terms of that perspective, because, not everybody jumps to the conclusion there's evil at play, first thing. And not everybody, avoids jumping to it that long, and some people will jump to it right away. But I thought, at least with the momentum of this film, it was kind of the right point for the family to really begin kind of freaking out, because things have gotten really weird at this point. And they finally begin to suspect real evil is at play in this situation. Now, as the viewer, you don't really know which way to go with it, but the family starts to at least recognize, hey, there's something else evil at work here.
It's interesting to me because, it set up this sort of Salem witchcraft vibe at the beginning. And so, with them being Puritans and whatnot, you figure the movie's going to do what all movies do and paint them as these sort of religious nuts wherein religion is the true evil and, and so forth. But it kind of rode that line. There were moments, it's like Exorcism, where there seemed to be some legitimate good versus evil, wherein religion was on the side of the good, and the dad sort of kind of oscillated in your mind between sort of this religious zealot authoritarian to an actual holy man of the Lord kind of thing. And it was hard for me to make up my mind on which side the movie was portraying.
So I kind of figured he was just like a flawed human being.
Yeah.
And not particularly evil. Just he's also went to the wrong woods. Now, in my situation, if I were in that situation, I'd be like, okay, twins babbling to the goat. I would have killed the goat and Bruce Campbelled my way out of there. I don't know if you ever saw The Evil Dead, but one of the first things Bruce Campbell's character does, but I can't remember if it was the first one or the second one. The second one's kind of remake of the first one anyway, but he's like, all right, well, I'm driving out of here. Vroom. Tries to drive out. The only way he can't do it is because the bridge is out.
Mm-hmm.
But he does at least do the smart thing, is like, first thing, I'm getting out of here right now.
Right.
Yeah, what a real person would do in that kind of situation.
Right.
Yeah, it would have been great if
the boy is like spitting out an apple, which is like physically impossible. Like, yep, I'm getting out of here. Boy's puking up blood in an apple. Would have
been fun if at some point in the movie, like, it skipped to the entire family sitting around eating goat.
That would have been
movie over.
Right. It'd be for the how it should have ended.
Right. How the witch should have ended.
So, and there's this family dynamic throughout the movie too, with the crops failing and things getting worse. The parents begin trying to discuss in secret, but the older kids are still awake too, about trying to get Thomason sold off to another family since she's of age. So there's this kind of whole family dynamic, especially with Thomason and the father and the mother, where it's a very complex relationship as she's getting to that point where she's not going to be a part of their family anymore, and so they're kind of trying to decide how they want to deal with this.
Yeah, there's a kind of a coming of age motif between both Thomason and Caleb in that movie too.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And of course, with most horror movies, and even to an extent in real life, adolescence is kind of paired with this sort of spiritual revolution in a person's life. And this is why you get these accusations of teenage girls going all witchcrafty, or even some people with poltergeist kind of thing. And in my research, the teenage period tends to be where most conversions or deconversions or intensification experiences, which is where somebody gets really serious about their religion really quick, occurs. So, obviously there is something about adolescence that, you can tie into spirituality in some way.
And I thought that was one thing you may find interesting about this movie too. I think a case could even be made that you're watching very much the destruction of Thomason's faith throughout this movie.
Well, it depends. We have to be very, very careful here. So by faith, I don't think you means belief, but more like loyalty to God, because that certainly erodes by the end of the film.
Yeah, that's a good distinction, and I think that's important here.
Wait, does her loyalty to God erode by the end of the film?
Yep, we're nearing the end of the film in the plot. All right, I couldn't tell that you were being not serious there.
So this is where all hell breaks loose in the movie. This entity, it appears to be a old witch of sorts, shows up, starts slaughtering the sheep while the children are in there, freaks them out. You don't know where they disappear to.
Yeah,
you want to tell us how she shows up?
Well, the children see what is apparently a witch locked inside them, and in the morning the father steps outside and sees the animals escape. So we don't actually get to see what happened. We just kind of have to guess that the witch did something bad to the children. So I guess we're left to assume that the children died because we don't see them again.
I think we actually do. I think we get very close to seeing them again in one of the last scenes of the movie.
All right, that's fair. So nobody else saw the witch being birthed out of the sheep.
Wait, what?
Yeah. I swear to you, there's a moment where the witch is birthed out of the sheep.
How bright did you have to have your screen turned up to see that? I just saw her back at one point. I thought she landed on the roof because you hear this thud. And
yeah.
Birthed out of the sheep? Really?
Yeah.
Well, if it wasn't going to be problematic, I would see if we could play that scene, but I'm not going to play that on this channel.
So I do remember the mother comes out and accuses Thomason of being a witch and killing her children. So I kind of assumed that the twins died.
I think something happened to them. I think they were likely taken by the witch and used for a sacrifice. Is my suspicion, but again, that's kind of based on the precedence of what we've seen in the rest of the movie versus any solid evidence of it. But yeah, so who wants to give kind of the final spoiler on this thing, of this wacky 20 minutes we get towards the end of the movie?
Well, I can do it. I have some notes here. So, like I said, in the morning, the father steps outside, sees the animals escape. The black goat Philip attacks the father. The mother comes out and accuses Thomason of being a witch, accusing her of killing her children. As the mother attacks Thomason, she fights back, but the mother strangles her, and then Thomason kills her. Now, after the black goat Philip attacks the father, I'm assuming that the father's dead. She's just, yeah.
Well, interestingly about that, he gets gored by the goat. So he loses this fight that he's had with the goat at least once already. He gets gored by it and gets knocked into this huge pile of wood that he has built up by the house, which then collapses on top of him.
And okay, so after Thomason kills her mother, after her mother tried to kill her, Thomason walks into the house and sleeps, resting her head on the desk. At night, she walks to the black goat, who leads her inside the broken animal house. Black Phillip, I conjure thee to speak to me. She asks to speak to her as it spoke to Jonas and Mercy. Those were the twins. A male voice responds to her and asks her if she would like to see the world and live deliciously. In return, she must write her name in the book after undressing. Thomason goes into the forest to meet the witches. And basically the film ends right there. And after the movie ends, the film says, as I mentioned before, this film was inspired by many folk tales, fairy tales, and written accounts of historical witchcraft, including journals, diaries, and court records. Much of the dialogue comes directly from these period sources.
Yeah. For me, I found the ending very shocking and chilling in a way, because you don't really know where to go with this whole movie. And at the end, you do see that real evil has plagued this family. And, you know, this revelation of real evil. And I tell you, the best depiction of Satan you could ever have in a movie, I think. I don't think you could make it any scarier than just this dark, disturbing voice. And you hear like boot spurs kind of click as he walks. You never see anything more than some legs and hear the voice, but very interesting depiction, I found. It definitely was pretty chilling the first time I saw this.
I wasn't that shocked because horror movies, particularly contemporary horror movies, often have like one of those, sad endings where the good guys don't win.
Yeah,
It's definitely not the first time it's happened.
was gonna
That's one of the
happen.
reasons why, even though like artistically, I thought this was a good movie, but personally, it's like I don't really like these types of endings. I like it when the good guys win.
Yeah, I thought the ending was appropriate to the movie, and I knew something was going to happen with Thomason since about the creek where she started pretending to be a witch. I was like, yeah, she's headed down a bad road. I imagine that the focus of the movie will be on her and happen in the end because it's a horror movie.
I think the ending was actually happier than it could have been. if there's a way of saying that, like, there was this fear for me that, as going through the movie, that like, this really is all of their own doing. It's all the pride. It's looking at these scenarios and seeing the supernatural where there's not. And for me, the fact that could have been the ending was a little bit scarier than seeing real evil kind of revealed and at work in the situation. It was scarier to me to think that, this was just something they had conjured up in their own heads, than to see this kind of revelation of real evil. And I think that's one of the things that makes the movie so interesting, is it forces you to kind of think about these type of things as to what's real, what's not. When are we calling things evil or of the devil when there's no devil there? And from a Christian perspective, in believing that there are evil spiritual forces in the world, when are we not giving enough credence to it being a supernatural force at work?
Well, when I thought it was pretty clear that, the witch was real in the first place, but you could make the argument that, apart from the baby, all the other characters have some sort of character flaw that kind of eventually leads to their own destruction in the path of the witch.
Yeah. But, it's interesting to me because when the dad drags the daughter down by the creek and starts accusing her of being a witch, and, basically, clearly he just wants the truth out of her, that she can be forgiven, and that he's not going to condemn her, and that the grace of God can, which is a very unusual message to be coming from him. He seemed more like a fire and brimstone kind of guy. So to be preaching more of a gospel forgiveness type thing was kind of came out of the blue for me.
Yeah, because throughout the rest of the film, until that kind of moment, all we hear is kind of, even in Thomason's prayer and kind of the beginning of the movie, it's all very, very dark in terms of, it just deals with the fear of God. It doesn't deal with any of the love or mercy aspects of his character. It just deals with fear, with hell, and never kind of gets to that mercy piece until that scene with the father.
Honestly, to me, that apologetic virtue of the film would be that, there is that up to that moment, there was this sort of fear of hellfire, this idea that redemption is based on baptism, this whole very much a legalistic kind of approach to religion. And then that is the moment that the film turns and, reveals more of a redemptive mercy, grace kind of aspect to theology and religion. So that was an interesting twist at that moment. And that was the truly redemptive point of the film for me.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, I had thought about that some. I hadn't seen it as such a key kind of shift there until you bring it up. And, but I think you're probably onto something. It is interesting that it's not brought up until that kind of moment.
Now, I don't put it to the idea that the film writers had the kind of theological sophistication to do that intentionally, but it happened nonetheless.
Well, I'm not sure. I think it depends on the worldview of the director, of the writers, as to whether that's the case. I think there are some movies that carry some very hidden messages in the things that are just under the surface, especially in horror movies. I see that more than anywhere else. There's a great Korean film called The Wailing that it has the gospel message laid within this movie, and yet it's completely under kind of the surface. So it wouldn't surprise me if that was the kind of thing underladen here too. I thought one of the big takeaways for me was very much the same thing we talk about in Deconversion. It's this strict legalism kind of background that they've come from, plus allowing, the dangers of pride to get in the way and really keep driving this family deeper and deeper into the darkness. It's very much what a horror movie should be. It's a moral tale. Horror movies help us recognize that, yes, there is moral right and wrong. Otherwise, horror movies would make no sense. And that's what we have here is very much a moral tale. The same way we get out of many old fairy tales is this is a moral tale. Avoid pride. Don't let pride be your downfall. And I think it does speak against, strict legalism within the church as well. At least as a Christian, that can be one of my takeaways from the film.
I did a series of articles on horror movies related to what you find is that horror movies tend to tap into religious symbolism or religious ideology specifically because religion provides a groundwork on which there is real evil. There are real good and evil, and evil actually has some kind of potency to it. Absent that religious framework, evil isn't quite as potent or important. So you have have all themes like free will. That's a big one in zombie films. The worst thing about being zombified is that you lose your free will. And death is truly horrific on a religious context because of the risks associated with it. So all of these things, you have to have some kind of ontological moral standards for horror to be truly horrific.
Okay. Well, I wanted to give anybody else a chance to jump in there if they wanted to. But yeah, that's very much the case here, I think. And between all of that, between everything we've kind of talked about and kind of the brilliance of the filmmaking of this movie, some of the underlying thought processes you can have with it, this is one of those I love to sit down and discuss with people for the reason that it does bring up these issues. I think many people who watch this, I've talked with multiple non-believers who've watched this, and they do see it as kind of the dangers of the church in a way. This is how they've seen the church, is from a very legalistic perspective, and so they can relate to it on that kind of level. And it brings up a great starting point for having a discussion about those sort of things. And to be able to look at at the multiple levels. It's not just the church or the community that's the problem. It's also the individual sin that is an issue for every human being. So interestingly enough, I'm not sure exactly why, and I know it wasn't something that they were particularly interested in. I actually heard the director, I think, speak out against it at one point. But this was one of those films that, one of the rare films, I don't know if I've ever seen it done with another one. This one is actually endorsed by the Church of Satan.
It sounds like something it might do in jest, because among other things, the Church of Satan doesn't even believe in Satan.
Anton LaVey Church of Satan?
Yeah.
Yeah, Anton LaVey's Church of Satan are atheists that are trolling Christians, essentially.
Exactly. Which makes it amusing. The director or somebody involved with production of the movie, I saw them speak out against it at one point. But, this was a thing where the Church of Satan put out a statement about, we fully endorse this movie. And like you said, of course, they're atheistic, so it's all trolling. But I found it amusing that was the case.
Yeah, basically, they're atheists that put on a Satan mask and hold the pitchfork for Halloween and go like, "Ooh, look at me, I'm Satan."
So, fast fact: I actually dressed up as Satan one year for Halloween.
All right, you're out.
Yeah. You dressed up as Hillary Clinton?
What's that?
You dressed up as Hillary Clinton?
Oh, no. This was a little bit before before the Clintons came into the public consciousness. But yeah, I actually and I went to. You've heard of those, like way back in the day where they did those the Trick or Treat Street for McDonald's.
Okay, no.
Oh, you never heard about those? Or no. Yeah, they went on when I was a kid.
This is like 80s, right?
Yeah, maybe it was just a California thing. I don't know, but yeah. So I went to one of those and actually got on the commercial. They had filmed me in my devil outfit, and I made the commercial. So
wow,
that was my first experience of being on television.
So when you're filling out those Facebook lists of things that you've done, you can always say you've been on television.
Well, I mean, yeah, I've been on television other times too. So yeah, and like when I went to Italy, I did television spots, kind of promoting the tour. So I've done actual television things before, but yeah, that was kind of my first experience with being on television.
So you were a child star. That explains a lot.
Sort of. Yeah, I mean, I was a Christian at the time. I went to church, so. I don't know why my parents. I don't know if it was I don't remember if it was my idea. I think it was just a costume we had lying around or something. But yeah.
You know, it's interesting. I read somewhere, and I say this with a grain of salt because I don't know how true it is, but I read a lot of the imagery of the Satan that we think of today, you know, pointy horns and red jumpsuit, you know, that sort of thing, came from cartoons that were really done as a reason of mocking the devil and kind of taking power away in that sense, from kind of a more frightening view of the devil.
Chick trucks.
You folks ever seen Studio C YouTube videos? So there's in one episode they have the devil in the red jumpsuit, but he's obese. This takes place in a fast food restaurant.
Wow.
The kind of the angel and the devil on the shoulder.
Okay.
It's actually kind of a funny video.
Well, some of the symbolism
Why people hate Chick-fil-A.
that you see with the devil comes from the kind of paganism that surrounded the Christian culture in its early inception. And so, for instance, the goat imagery comes from the god Pan. And Pan was sort of this god of the forest, sort of this pagan god. But, you know, when you see him in mythology, he's just kind of like this centaur who's not centaur. What do you call the half goat people?
Minotaurs?
Satyrs?
Okay, let's call it a satyr. Anyway, he's a half goat guy that's sitting around playing pipes and so forth. But the word Pan, of course, means everything. So this is the god Pan was kind of this pantheistic god that tied out of nature and everything. And so, but there was this goat imagery that went along with them, and this kind of half goat type mythological character is what they kind of base Satan on, because it's got the little goat horns and the cloven hooves and, runs around in the fields and things like that.
Okay, I just did a Google search for it, and it says a half human, half goat creature is a faun.
Thank you. I should have known that.
Oh, that's right, Mr. Tumnus.
Right, Mr. Tumnus.
Mr. Tumnus, yeah. And of course, there's a piece by Debussy, Prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun.
Yeah.
So to add a little more context to my comment a bit ago in regards to the Satanic Temple, here is their statement from Jack Blackmore, who was the spokesman for the Satanic Temple on this issue. They said the themes in the film mirrored the things we talk about in our work. It's a criticism of a theocratic patriarchal society and a fair representation of the stresses that puts on a community.
Of course, it has nothing to do with the satanic symbolism.
Right. Nothing to do with that.
So, it's interesting to me as I've thought about it. The scenario that is painted in this movie could easily be the beginnings of how real world cults begin, because you have the small religious community, in this case, the Puritans. And then there's some kind of person that sort of makes an uproar in the community. And so they're cast out. And so they're like, I'm going to start my own church with my own, but honestly, a lot of times it's just a large family. Like a lot of cults are just a big and start their own shenanigans and isolate themselves from the world and so forth. So, there are the makings of a cult, and I'm not sure if they were doing that intentionally or not. But, in fiction, cults are like these hooded robe people that take over the world subversively and do these magic rites and things like that. But in real life, a cult is just a bunch of people that isolate themselves and get kind of weird. It's kind of fall apart in isolation.
Right.
That's going to be my new definition of cult. People who isolate themselves and get kind of weird.
Mm-hmm.
I was reading that from the dictionary. I'm surprised you didn't know that.
Oh. Well, is VVitch in there? Because we need to know what that means.
Sorry, that's under double V in my addiction.
Gotcha. Yeah. So, again, I think that's another good point. Any kind of final thoughts that people have on the movie, the theological significance, before we kind of get into people giving this a rating, if you will?
Well, I can't think of something that has philosophical significance. Does that count?
Yes.
All right. A book they should have read. On Liberty. Yes, On Liberty. If they read On Liberty, they wouldn't have kicked the family out. Everyone would have just learned tolerance and avoided the whole witch altogether.
Aren't we supposed to be tolerant of witches, though?
No, tolerant of the Christian community disagreement thing. So, and if they were all tolerant, then they would not have left the community in the first place. They would all gotten along and avoided that whole mess.
Yeah. True.
So that's where you see the biggest issue is the disagreement within the church at the beginning. You're on mute.
I'm not sure he can hear you.
Yeah, I don't know if he can hear me either. I can't unmute you, Maverick.
Your mic is muted.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I accidentally muted myself. So, as I was saying, if they would have read this book, granted, On Liberty did not come out until centuries later. If they read it, got along, they would have, avoided that whole mess.
Yeah, of course, the father was the upstart, and I get the feeling that he was the sort of guy who wouldn't have remained in the community anyway unless they sort of conformed to his notions.
Because remember, they banished him. He was just like preaching Christ's true gospel, whatever that is. And so rather than have them all discuss it in the free marketplace by ideas, decide, we'll just kick you out.
So I noticed that when they talked about banishing the guy, they pronounced it banished. Is that what they talked back then?
That's
Sure.
the stereotype of the way that they talked back then. Yeah.
Well, it's just because I know when that word appears in a vocal work, you don't sing banished, you sing banished, and so I was thinking, does that come from because that's how they used to talk, or I was just kind of something I was curious about. Doesn't have any bearing on the movie or anything.
I have the impression that is how people talked at one point in history, but that impression may have been born out of things like what you were talking about and just how people sort of stereotype the way people talk back then.
That's a good question, though. I have no idea on that one.
Local Amish and find out if that's a thing.
Yeah, it's just a curiosity.
Might have been something, again, like I said, the one thing I do know is this director really does a good job researching, especially the language at the time. If you watch The Lighthouse, it's the same way. It gives you this language from just a different time. So I know that he takes a lot of precision, especially with language. So it might be something from one of those historical sources.
Yeah, maybe. I remember Willem Dafoe was like really convincing as I'm the old sea guy. Like super convincing in that role.
Yeah, such a bizarre, but another movie that just kind of sucks you in with the period time frame.
Which movie was this again?
The
The
Lighthouse.
Lighthouse. I haven't seen the end of it yet. The DVD I was watching kind of broke down. I'm gonna get around to seeing the end of it, so don't spoil it for me.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
The Lighthouse.
No,
Yeah.
not the Lighthouse. I told you drag that out till the end.
Had to get one more in.
Yeah. Joel, any final thoughts before we?
Nothing comes to mind.
Okay. Well, hey, I think I've covered all the ground I wanted to on this movie. So what do you think, guys? Y'all want to do another horror movie at some point on here? I mean, we did 3 Alien First Contact movies. So I think, we at least owe it 3 horror movies at some point.
Well, Maverick Christian's the next one because he just joined us, so he gets the next shot at the movie we watch.
All right, I was thinking maybe 1408. Have you all seen that one?
No.
All right, I recommend you all see that. It's one of my personal favorite horror movies.
Okay.
At some point, are we going to get into those really terrible Christian films on here and critique those?
No, we were going to talk good Christian films.
Oh,
I mean, we can talk bad ones too, but we wanted to talk about some good ones that we like that we could recommend.
all right. Well, Maverick's given us our next assignment, so this is his first turn at it.
Yeah, I'm ready to do the Christian film discussion anytime.
All right, so we'll do a horror series, and then we'll dive into Christian films. Seems
just
reasonable.
Got to sweep Wade right under the rug there, aren't you?
What do you mean? No, 1408's horror film, right?
Yeah, that's what we were going to do next.
Wait, it's a horror film?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I would have sworn it would just be a period piece.
I can't tell if you're being sarcastic or not.
I have a dry sense of humor.
All right.
People just don't get.
Well, no, I just I'm mildly autistic, so occasionally I can't tell when people are being serious and when they're not.
That's just this show. I can't tell. Maybe 30% of the time I know whether somebody's joking or not. So, sometimes my laughter's inappropriate, but that's how it goes with this show.
50% of the time, I can tell 100% of the time.
Yeah. So, last thing we need to do before closing this puppy out. On a scale of 1 to 10 VVitches, where would you guys... VVitches.
Oh, okay.
So, where would you put this movie? 10 being excellent, 1 being dreadful, stay away from it.
Well, I'll have to abstain from this for obvious reasons.
No, you have to make a call based purely on what you've learned tonight.
Okay, well, if I had to make a call just based purely on our discussion and my viewing of that one scene, I might place it up at 6 or 7. It's enough to pique my interest. I don't really do horror films, but as long as it doesn't like overdo the jump scares, as long as it's more of like an atmospheric thing, I'm usually okay with horror films.
Yeah, it's pretty atmospheric.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I could probably be okay with The Witch, and everything. It kind of seemed interesting enough to get my attention. Don't know if I'll ever watch it since we've already had the discussion, but I might at some point.
I give the movie a B+. I'm not sure where it would fall under the 1 through 10 VVitch scale. I said it wasn't going to be that 1 to 10 Witch scale. Maybe a 7.
Well, that'd be like an 8.5, wouldn't it? If you're giving it a B+.
Or yeah, maybe.
Yeah, that's how grading works.
Well, because 5 would be a C, right? Because it's midway.
Well, 7 would be C. Usually C's are 70 to 79%. 50 would be failing.
Yeah.
But that doesn't make sense on a scale from 1 to 10. 5 would be in the middle.
That's just how the grading scale works. Yeah, I mean you would expect 5 to be middle of the road, but 5 is actually failing. 6 would be a D. 7 would be a C, etc.
I mean, if you're translating letter grade to a scale of 1 to 10 system, it would be a C would be a 5.
Anyway,
I mean, I'm just going by how they grade, because if like 70 to 79 was a C, translating that to a scale of 1 to 10 would be a 7.
No, that doesn't make sense because the percentage for grades doesn't apply on a scale of 1 to 10. Otherwise, a 5 would be a passing grade.
B+
doesn't
is
translate.
an acceptable measure.
Well, a C is a passing grade, isn't it?
Yeah, but it wouldn't be 50%. 50% ain't passing. They have higher standards in school, even in the American education system.
I was
guys,
homeschooled.
shut up and let me write the movie.
All right.
I'll give it a 9. It would have been an 8.
What was that? You cut out just a little bit.
I said I'll give it a 9. It would have been an 8, but the guy's voice bumped it up.
He's got a really good deep gravelly voice, man. It's really good. So I was going to say, even though I gave it a B+, I personally didn't like the film that much because of the ending, but in the capacity of being a movie, I thought it was pretty well done. So that's hence the B+.
Yeah, first time I saw this movie, I'll be honest, first time I saw it, I probably would have given it like a 6. I've seen it 4 or 5 times since then now at this point. And each one has kind of bumped it up a notch because I've noticed more and more details I missed, that sort of thing. So
maybe it gets better on repeat viewings.
Yeah, I really think it does get better on repeat viewings. And so I would probably be in the 8.5 range at this point. All right. Well, where can people find you? You got the 10 seconds to give the spiel of where people can go if they just have to see more of you.
All right. Well, I have an interview that's going to be posted on my YouTube channel sometime within the next few days on the Eternal Society Paradox. I recently published a paper on the Eternal Society Paradox and have an interview on that. Post that on my YouTube channel soon. Maverick Christian.
Cool.
Yeah, you can find me on Facebook or Twitter. Although I'm really starting to not use Twitter so much, but you can keep up with my work on Twitter because I post it there. You can find me on Facebook. Just search for my name. You can find some of my articles on the Life Training Institute blog at prolifetraining.com, and also on the Secular Pro-Life blog. You can go to blog.secularprolife.com. And just a quick plug, I actually recently did a podcast appearance that was a little bit out of my usual podcast appearances. It was on a podcast called Homesteads and Homeschools, which you can find on Apple Podcasts. And I actually talked about logic and why it's important for kids to learn logic, and as well as some of my experience teaching homeschool kids. So that's a recent podcast appearance I did that's a little different than my usual fare.
Bless you, my child. World needs more people like you, advocating the teaching of logic.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Agreed. I recently was removed from multiple homeschool Facebook groups for speaking out against QAnon. So,
really,
yeah, logic is sorely lacking in homeschools, I'm afraid. So
I
won't say all of them, but among the outspoken ones.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying you're saying all. I'm just saying that because I know some homeschool communities are big on classical education, and logic is pretty big in classical education. But I would imagine, probably not all homeschools do that. But I'm actually looking into homeschooling my nieces starting next year, and we're going to do a classical education. So I'm very, very much in favor of classical education.
Very cool.
And so, yes, logic and even learning Latin is a pretty big part of it. So. Yeah, so
Nice.
I'll actually be learning a lot of things along with them as I teach. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, I learn more than my kids do, I'm pretty sure. So,
yeah.
Joel, aside from our channel here at Mentionables.
All right, so most of my work currently is with the conversion and deconversion. So you can follow my work on Twitter at Sides Switching. Or on Facebook at Switching Sides, and that's mostly where I post. I really don't write frequently for those publications, so they really want to find out about me, just Google my name. I've got a website, joelfurchess.com. That's about it.
You want to talk about that video you did today?
Sure. I can talk about that. So this was a video that was requested on Facebook and the Christian Apologetics Alliance page, and I was linked to it by Mark of the Mentionables because it was some way related to psychology. It was basically the argument from consciousness, and a YouTube atheist, Rationality Rules, might be familiar with him, had done a video debunking the argument from consciousness, and so
debunking.
Yeah, and so Mark wanted me to do a video rebunking it. So
Yeah, actually, Brandon Rickabaugh was one who actually brought it up into the CAA and asked for someone to reply to it, because he made a lot of really bad arguments against it and that kind of thing. And Brandon, I think, is a philosopher or a philosophy student at Baylor University, I believe.
well, I answered the call, and my
Yeah.
video I my video in the comments section and on the Mentionables web Facebook page, and also tweeted it out at the Mentionables Twitter, which is at Mentionables1.
Yeah, so hopefully, Rationality Rules will see it and consider what he had to say.
And then debunk it.
Right.
Well, very cool. That gives listeners something else to check out right after this. I'll have to throw the video link onto here so they can just click it after this one ends. So Joel's already given the pitch for the Mentionables. Be sure to hit notifications, and so that you can find out next time we're going to go live. Subscribe if you like this. If not, then don't. Hope you at least got something from it. But
yeah, I mean, leave us a comment in the comments section. We've followed suggestions on things we should talk about or ways to improve the discussion, or if you just want to respond to the discussion that we're having, please do, because there's quite a few mentionables, and one or the other of us will get in there and hold the conversation in the comments section.
Yep, absolutely. So yeah, I think that's about it for tonight. So hopefully y'all enjoyed the discussion on. You want to say it one more time, Joel?
Sorry, you're breaking up. What was the question?
I just said I hope listeners enjoyed the discussion on. I was giving you a last opportunity to say it one more time before we go out. The name of the film we watched.
VVitch.
I set him up for it. He's losing us, I think. All right. So, hey, he doesn't get to give his last VVitch there. So, all right. Well, y'all have a nice night, and we will see you next time.